In the early 20th century, researchers in Europe began to study how the human brain perceives visual input. And long and the short of what they discovered was that the human brain seeks order, recognizable shapes and patterns, regardless of what the visual input is. It's the same phenomena, for example, that if you're looking up at a cluster of clouds and you try to find animal shapes in the clouds, you see bunnies, you see elephants, whatever. Your brain is trying to make sense of that chaos of visual input. Well, we've got 4 theories that we discuss in White Space is Not Your Enemy that are specifically helpful to graphic designers when they are doing layouts and how to order and organize their content. So the 4 theories that we're going to talk about specifically in this video are proximity, similarity, continuity, and closure. So for the sake of argument, we've got all the assets for a simple web page here. And we're going to start by talking about the concept of proximity. If we take this very same content and we order it just a little bit differently, it becomes a very different website. The concept of proximity simply means that when things are close together, they are in proximity to each other, the brain associates them as belonging together. So by clustering the content on this page and separating clusters by white space, we end up with 3 main content areas here. We have the navigation, which is all up here together. We have a block of the banner, becomes another block. And then we have down on the bottom this whole area that is the content area. And the content area is kind of subset up into various clusters as well. Again, headings and content are together, so we know what heading belongs to what content. And the separate sections are separated by white space. Remember, white space is not your enemy. So that's proximity. Things close together are associated as belonging together. Another theory that applies here and does kind of the same thing in ordering and organizing information is the idea of similarity. In other words, things that are similar, we also associate as belonging together. And now I've just added a yellow color behind this particular cluster of text, and suddenly what we get is all these things that are with the yellow background belong to one unit and are separate from this cluster over here that is with a background of white. Similar background means that these things belong together and it keeps them separate from the other areas. We can do this, here's another example. You can kind of see how instead of having one big solid block of yellow grouping these, we now have 3 clusters because the color helps create separate sections. The blue backgrounds belong to one, the yellow backgrounds belong to another, and the white background is a separate piece altogether. So we cluster things that are similar together. Color is not the only way that we can do this. We can also use different fonts to show similarity. We can use shape as well, but in this case what we have done is we have taken the caption, which is obviously separate from the content area, given it a slightly different color and a different font style. You see it's set in italic. So we know that it becomes different than these other things that, because they are set in a similar fashion, belong together, are similar. The caption becomes a visually separate entity. The next of the theories that I want to talk about is continuity. And what continuity simply means is that we can create sort of lines, visual lines of sight. We can create a sense of movement by placing things, ordering things in lines. And these lines can be literal. We can actually create a physical line, or we can use objects to put them in line and create sort of, sense of direction without a literal line in place. So in this case, what I have done is I have taken the subheadings and I have made them all a color. The effect of this then is that the eye tends to want to pop from one to the next. It gives you little stepping stones. So we have this heading here, another subheading, another one here, and another one here. This is continuity. This is using similarity and putting them in a certain order and creating a sense of line and motion and movement in the layout. So very literally, line of sight here and another line of sight can be created actually just simply by lining up our copy blocks along a left axis. That creates a sense of continuity as well. So we're creating visual lines. A more literal approach to this can be seen here. In this case, we have used continuity. We've used similar icons and placed them at a point in points at which the eye wants to follow them in this order. We also follow this literal dotted line. We're doing the same thing with the little content blocks with the numbers. We want to follow 1, 2, 3, 4. We're using color, similar fonts, and specific positioning to create this flow through this layout. This is continuity. This is a very literal, linear use of continuity. Now, the final piece that I want to talk about is called closure. And closure simply means that when the brain is presented the part of something, our brains automatically fill in the rest by default, especially if it's a common shape that we're familiar with. In this case, we've got two examples of the same thing going on here. In the banner, we've got a photo of hot air balloons. Even though we don't see the entirety of the hot air balloon, we know that if this photo were to continue, the lines of the balloon would continue down. There'd be some sort of basket down here, and we'd have a nice rounded top here. Same for the other balloons. We're only seeing pieces of them, but we know that in reality they are going to continue, so we know that they are hot air balloons, even though we're only seeing a part. You see it in the background image as well. Even though the lines are cut off by the banner, we can visually follow this line down here, and we know that the rest of the basket will continue, off side of the page where we don't see it. But that's closure. That's the idea that if we're only seeing part of a whole, if we've got enough of that whole, our brains are going to visually close the gaps and create the object so we know exactly what it is, even though we're not seeing all of it. For more information on Gestalt theory and how it's applied, we recommend reading Chapter 5, Mini Art School in White Space is Not Your Enemy.